So Alex, Brandon, it's great to see you guys. I anticipate this to be like a pretty informal discussion just about your journey as entrepreneurs. I think you guys had a very unique journey in a time before it was obvious that open source software would be the future. I think it was obvious to some of us, but it was not obvious to, the entire market, and it's becoming more obvious, right? And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs will appreciate hearing from you, appreciate hearing what like your journey was in the early days. And I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions. I probably won't ask you about the CoreOS bus that was used for marketing. I love that thing. I was thinking about asking you questions about that, or the interrogation that I received before I got a chance to invest in the company, where Alex met me in the middle of San Francisco, drove me into the woods, and subjected me to questioning for hours. Although maybe we'll get there eventually. Do you do that with everybody, Alex?
I just really enjoy going out in the woods, but yeah. Fortunately, that place caught on fire, but we can talk about that later.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I mean, I remember, again, super early in my venture career, but like Alex was like, hey, just meet me in San Francisco. We'll go somewhere. Like, all right, cool. We like met on the side of the road somewhere. You're like, just leave your car here, get in this big vehicle, towing another vehicle with me. And then like 2 hours later, we're in the middle of the woods on an ATV. And I'm like, is this guy legit, or am I not going to come back? Like, what's happening? But I did feel thoroughly vetted. So that was a good experience. Good. And I always appreciated that other executives had that to like bond with me, right? Like when you'd hire new executives, they'd be like, did you get a chance to go into the woods with Alex? Do you guys mind sharing a little bit about how you originally connected, and then how you connected around this idea for CoreOS?
Alex and I went to school together at Oregon State, and we worked at a lab called the Open Source Lab, which makes a lot of sense for where our careers eventually took us.
We were in every single computer science class together, and we pretty much sat next to each other in every single computer science class. And then we started the Linux users group together. We did this open source lab thing together. So we've known each other since the beginning of college. And then after school, our careers diverged a little bit. I went to Mozilla, and then Brandon went to SUSE Novell, working on Linux kernel development, and I kind of went down more of a product managery sort of path. And eventually we came back together, around CoreOS. And yeah, it was like Brandon and I have been like lifelong friends. It was awesome to be able to work together, on this project.
You guys had a very unique journey in a time before it was obvious that open source software would be the future. There's a lot of like debate about whether or not that enterprises would bet their future on Kubernetes. You guys sort of saw that coming in the very beginning. Can you talk about what led you to sort of have this vision for CoreOS as a company? And was it like an epiphany, or did it just sort of evolve to get there?
I think there's two things in that. So one, Kubernetes being something that takes over, to me, it was like when I have conviction as an entrepreneur, I would say have a decent amount of timidness towards things for a very long time until I really believe it. But Kubernetes for me was one that was just like super obvious the minute it was released. Like I remember when we were announcing Tectonic, our Kubernetes platform, at the Kubernetes 1.0 launch, I'm like, how are we the only ones here launching an enterprise product right now? Like, where is everybody? This is so obvious. Like we were all nervous about like getting scooped by someone or whatever, but it was just a combination of technical excellence with the community rallying side. Like so many projects are successful because of the community rallying and not the technical side. But when you have the technical side and the community side, it's just unstoppable. So Kubernetes was obviously that. For us, Kubernetes and Docker and like the whole container world that emerged was a lot of, be honest, luck that came up as we were developing this. I mean, our core thesis and idea was this idea around automated operations. Like what could we do to automate things like updates like Brandon talked about, but also those other tasks that just burden operations teams. And so we started building every component that was required to do that, starting from the OS all the way up to the distributed systems layer. And that involved containers and that involved distributed systems. And we helped create the low level, like the really hard parts of that stuff And then we also were able to participate in community with folks like Docker and Kubernetes and whatnot that just helped give the whole thing a lot of lift as well. And, we couldn't have built it all ourselves, but the idea from CoreOS from the very beginning never really changed. And I felt like we had these big, this big help from just the market evolving around us as we built our tech.
Curious to know, like, there's so many board meetings that I'm in where I'm asking founders to focus. Like, let's just pick the 2 or 3 things that matter here. At CoreOS, you're doing so much all at the same time. Is that, how are you thinking about prioritization in the organization, and how should young companies at the sort of Series A, Series B stage, how should they think about going after enormous opportunities like you saw?
I always felt like we had a single focused vision. It's just, it was a complex, difficult one. So it had a lot of different pieces to it. So it was very focused on one thing. It just, in order to enable that, we had to build a lot of stuff.
I think one of the challenges with Kubernetes in particular was a lot of our customers were drawing us into the data center or onto clouds that Kubernetes wasn't on initially, which caused us to have to invent a lot of stuff too to even make the product work. And so similar to what Alex said, we had a single product vision, but like pluggable networking backends or like on and on and on. We just had to, we had to actually just invent it and then get into Kubernetes in order to enable the product. So it got complicated pretty quick.
You started off as a YC company, and can you share a little bit about that experience and the impact that it had on you as you formed this business over time?
I'm a fan of get any chips to help make the company successful, just because I feel like there's so many things that are creating headwinds for early stage companies. I mean, there's just so many different little things that can go wrong. And so like anything that could give you the tiny little bit of extra ability to be successful with the company, I'm game for it. And I see YC as a big one of those. It's a big chip. Some people say it's an expensive chip, but I don't look at it that way at all, because I think just if the company is able to get off the ground and get going, and that the rocket ship is able to launch, like it doesn't matter so much how expensive it was to get it built, sort of thing. Expensive in this case, I mean like equity wise and stuff for YC, but I just think that YC is one of those things that gives you a lot of help. And so it was, my second time doing YC, and a lot of people are like, why would you do it again? And it's just because of all the other benefits you get from YC, other than just the like startup 101 aspects of it.
At JV, we are on the investing team. We're big fans of this book called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. And in it, she talks about, being able to go back and look at the decisions that you made along the way. The thought is like, forget about whether the outcome was great or not great, right? We have companies that sell for billions of dollars that like are convinced that they just got everything right along the way. It's like, all right, well, forget about what the exit was. Forget about what the outcome was. Let's go back and look at all the decisions we made. Like, were they good decisions? Were they bad decisions? Curious to know with this lens, like, are there ways that you would spend your time differently or spend your hires differently at that Series A, Series B stage, given what you know now?
I mean, probably just go slower. That's like the opposite of early stage tech, but because we were in a place of like creating a whole new like category with everybody, like Kubernetes and containers and all this stuff is like a whole new category. Like probably just slowing down and letting them like motions of time happen a little bit would have been beneficial, like spending less money and not getting as big and everything would probably been helpful in this case. I think, again, if we were in a more mature market like we are now, I still think like the Kubernetes world is mature but nascent, that could be a little bit different. It could be much more a like product go-to-market engine versus a R&D one. But when you're in the R&D mode and helping create the space, probably go slower would be one. Like we had a lot of engineers going, or we spent a lot on sales and marketing too, pretty aggressively, and probably just going a little bit slower would have been beneficial.
Yeah, we built a lot of stuff and then had to rebuild it as the market. Like we had to originate stuff. The origination caused the market to kind of rethink what technology they were building and why. And then it took a long time for that to settle out. And so if we had been able to essentially poke people with a big stick and then cause them to build the thing that we actually needed to make our product work, it would have been more effective. I don't think we ever thought of it that way. That was kind of the outcome that happened multiple times, was we built something that wasn't exactly what got adopted, but then that big poke caused the right thing to be built, and then a bunch of companies to collapse around that technology.
Founders of ours are constantly asking to like, hey, can you introduce us to Brandon and Alex? Can they be advisors? Like, can they do calls with us? Like, and we try to be really protective of your time. But, you know, if you were that CEO that's in the middle of COVID, that is in the middle of, you know, a massive economic downturn and an uncertain geopolitical times and the market the way it is, like, what advice would you have for somebody that's managing all of that plus their personal lives?
I mean, it's a great time to raise capital. I think it's a great time to be any sort of online company. I think, you know, with the whole shift to remote, hey, we answered that question for everybody. Like, yeah, remote is a thing and it's not going anywhere, you know, like just some of the basic organizational stuff, which means like I'm sure there's more and more resources every day to make it easier to have remote companies, which gives you much better access to talent. Like all these things are actually kind of net positive for these tech companies. There's a whole set of new problems, I'm sure, to go out there and solve in the world right now because of it, you know? So like, I still strongly feel, hey, it's a great time to go be an early stage tech founder. You
built a culture that I think still, compared to a lot of our other companies that we work with and interact with, was one of the most diverse, inclusive, thoughtful cultures that we had seen. How did you think about building that culture? Was that deliberate or did it just happen?
Some of it was very deliberate. I think Alex has a strong bias towards doing interesting or quirky things that come to his mind. And I think that brought the team together in a lot of ways. You know, having our all hands meetings in the basement of our weird building in San Francisco. And I think having those sorts of stories, those shared experiences help a lot with just team cohesion, and it makes the team have something to anchor on. And so deliberate or not, I think there's a reflection partially of just personalities of us. And then on like inclusivity stuff, we did do a lot of conscious stuff. I deeply believe things like ally skills training and implicit bias training are important just to create a baseline of like understanding an organization, particularly as you like bring on more people. Just having everyone have a shared understanding of important ideas like that helps quite a bit. And I think it's a lot of fun for me personally. I've been through ally skill training like a lot of times now. I probably 4 or 5, and just seeing people have aha moments around stuff that they just hadn't really thought about is really exciting for me. And it's like a good moment for people to grow as a team too, in a place that can be a little uncomfortable. Like being a little uncomfortable sometimes is okay, and it brings you closer to people too if you're able to be uncomfortable in a spot. And then I think the last thing we did is we focused pretty rigorously on like the way we did hiring and making sure that hiring was super consistent, and hiring guides and pre-meetings and post-meetings for the hiring interview teams, and making sure that we had consistent question banks. I think that enables you to not to kind of have a baseline of what you expect as you're hiring people. And a good team is kind of the root, or a good consistently hired team is kind of the root of any good culture, I feel like.
So in the same way that you guys were really thoughtful about the set of people that worked in the company, you were super thoughtful about the folks on your cap table. What sort of criteria did you use to get investors involved? And what was your experience like working with venture investors? How did you think about that? And how would you think about it differently going forward?
Through the YC world, we were down the venture startup path, which is, I believe, a distinct path of the way you have, the way you start a company. I also think that Sand Hill Road is this grand bazaar of cash where everybody is trying to differentiate their cash, but cash is inevitably a non-differentiatable commodity. And so it really comes down to like the people that you get to work with and what comes along with those people.
What's next for you two? And how do you think about, do you already have that itch to do the next one, or, what do you guys want to do after this?
I think Brant and I both love technology, and we both love playing with technology, and we both are continuing to play with technology and seeing what's out there. And we tend to be attracted to these really arcane, low-level, nerdy things, which also happen to be often the things the next set of tech is built on top of. And so I don't think that's stopped. That's sort of in our nature. But
my entire career has been spent in like infrastructure software. I mean, like pretty much everything that I worked on from the very beginning after graduating college through CoreOS was kind of through this same through line. And I think part of what I'm spending time doing right now is just understanding where the next big technology impact could be. Not that I think like infrastructure software is like fully wrapped and done. But I do think that there are places outside of how do you help more engineers build more software, where infrastructure software may be important. And so I think that's where my heart and my motivation is right now. So, yeah.
Well, I wanted to thank you guys both from our whole firm, and deeply from me. I've loved teaming with both of you guys. Just again, this sort of authentic, visionary, combination of the two of you has just been amazing to team with, and I've loved it. So thank you guys.